season for a brand new show. Scooby Doo is here again, away we go.
Scooby Doo is running from a spooky ghost.
Shaggy isn't doing what he does the most. Hey, come on, get involved till the mystery is solved.
Hang around for Scooby Doo.
Hey, come on, get involved till the mystery is solved.
Hang around for Scooby Doo. That's my pal. Scooby Dooby Doo.
Hello, Scooby Doo fans! Welcome to my Season 1 Episode 9 review of the Scooby Doo Show. So last time I continued my reviews of the Scooby Doo Show with a Season 1 Episode 8 review of the Scooby Doo Show, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. But of course today, I'll be covering Season 1 Episode 9 of the Scooby Doo Show, titled Mamba Wamba and the Voodoo Hoodoo, which was released on November 6, 1976. The short synopsis of the episode is, the gang is having fun with their old friends who are now a music group. They are ready to sing a new song based on an ancient voodoo chant, but they also bring back a long-dead ancient shaman who plans to turn them into zombies. So as per usual, I'll be watching Season 1 Episode 9 of the Scooby Doo Show on the Scooby Doo Dynamite Hour, the complete series DVD. This DVD has every episode of Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, as well as every episode of Dynamite. So, if you want a physical media copy of Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, then unfortunately this is the only way you could watch Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show on any sort of physical media or DVD. But it also has Dynamite, so for any people who love Dynamite as well and want that entire show as well as Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, then this DVD is for you. Now, as far as this episode's reception is concerned, I believe most fans aren't really too keen on this episode. It's not a very it's not talked about a lot in the Scooby-Doo community. And even when it is, it's not viewed very positively. I only seem to see really negative reviews, or negative discussion on the episode, if at all it's ever talked about. So it's not a very talked about episode, and it doesn't seem like it's a very highly regarded one. So I had low expectations going into this. But, do I agree with the Scooby-Doo community? Do I think this is a bad episode? Or am I maybe in the camp where I think it's decent or average? Or maybe I consider it a hidden gem that's actually good and maybe not talked about as much? Well, let's find out, shall we? So let's take a look at the episode to see whether I think it is a good or bad episode of the Scooby Doo Show. The episode begins with the gang attending the concert of their old friend, Alex Super, who has become the lead singer of a famous band called the Alex Super Experience. Alex has invited them as a special guest. While the band performs one of their new songs titled Mamba Wamba, an ancient shaman appears telling them they have violated a sacred chant by playing the song. For some unknown reason, there's a woman that screams before the ancient shaman even appears, and I have no clue whether she's involved with the villain scheme, or if she has nothing to do with it and we just heard some other completely unrelated incident. It was so odd. It could have been a recording. It could have been an unknown accomplice that had nothing, didn't get caught. Or it could have just been a completely different experience, because there's no reason an audience member should be screaming before the ancient shaman even appeared. Nothing had happened yet. With a cloud of smoke, he disappears, taking the band's solo female member named Delilah. The gang decides to help Alex find Lila by heading to Mason Dupree, the plantation Lila grew up on. There, they discover voodoo dolls of all the members of the Alex Super Experience, including their manager, Roger. While they're searching for clues, a zombie appears to chase Shaggy and Scooby. After all the band members disappear one by one, it's up to the gang to save them and Lila. After a failed attempt at catching Mamba Wamba, the gang decides to split up once more. Shaggy and Scooby are chased by the zombie outside and take refuge in a grass field. After they lose the zombie, they hear some thumping coming from a nearby log, which they believe to be Mamba Wamba, but it ends up being just a frog that's inside the nearby log. They then hear voodoo drums in the distance and attempt to run away from them, with the frog even hitchhiking with them, but they end up on top of a hut. While hiding, they discover they're in Mamba Wamba's lair, where they see Alex, Ray, and Deke being held hostage. They also discover that Lila has in fact been turned into a zombie. Mamba Wamba promises Alex, Ray, and Deke the same fate as Lila unless they sign a parchment vowing to never play the sacred chant again. Alex signs the parchment just as Scooby and Shaggy give away their hiding places. The frog then steals the parchment with Shaggy, Scooby, Mamba Wamba, the zombie, and Lila all pursuing it. Shaggy and Scooby escape, giving the parchment to Fred, Daphne, and Velma, who recognize it as the final clue. They devise a trap to catch Mamba Wamba. After capturing them on a net, the gang calls the police to unveil what's been happening. I really enjoy the final trap sequence. I think it's an awesome trap sequence. I love Shaggy dropping the line about how, you know, next time he's going to devise the trap and Fred's going to be the bait. I really wish Hanna-Barbera had followed through with that line and actually given Shaggy the chance to showcase that. It would have been a nice, reversal of roles and turn of the tables. Had a future episode follow through with that promise. But still, Shaggy and Scooby do a lot in this episode, particularly Shaggy. He's the one that gets the idea to get the parchment because he wants to wrap up the mystery, and he actually does a lot. And the frog even gets a lot of involvement in the second half of the episode, which is very odd. It reminds me of the baby chick from Jeepers, It's the Creeper. But also that's odd is that this trap actually works. There's no, this trap fails and the villain gets caught by other means. No, Fred's trap actually works this time without fail. And kudos, Fred, you did it. You created a successful trap. I'm so happy for you. So I really love that everything worked well, and Shaggy dropping that line, it was all fun. Shaggy was the best part of the episode. He did a lot in this episode, so this was the best sequence of the episode, in my opinion.
Okay, Velma, this part's done. How about the mirror, Shag?
Mirror's ready, Freddy.
Daphne, you know what you're to do?
Sure, when Mamba Wamba and the zombies see Scooby and Shaggy in the mirror, I pull the mirror up by the pulley.
Right, and Mamba and his gang hit the trampoline and bounce into the net.
Hold it. What's all this about zombies chasing me and Scoob?
You're the bait.
It's the only way. When Mamba Wamba comes out of the secret passageway, it'll be you two he's looking for.
Did you have to remind us?
Hey, they're coming.
Everybody get ready. Make sure they see this parchment, Shag.
Like next time, I'm gonna think up the trap, and you can be the bait. Well, we sure outsmarted that old Mamba Wamba and his gang, huh, Scoob? Ha! We still got the parchment.
There they are. Now we've got them.
Here they come, Scoob. Now, let's head for the trap. Here we are, Mamba.
Okay, you two can look now. We caught them.
It turns out that Roger ends up being Mamba Wamba. No surprise there. He made it so obvious throughout the episode that he was involved somewhat. So there was no surprise for me there that Roger was involved in the scheme. Lila is revealed to also be part of the scheme and just played herself as a zombie. And who's the other zombie? Some unknown henchman. We don't get a name drop or nothing. We don't hear him be we don't know if he's a hired henchman. We don't know if he's a friend of theirs. No clue who this guy is. Doesn't get a name drop. And yeah, just a nameless henchman. So they devised a scheme to scare the band out of the rights to the Mamba Wamba Voodoo Chant song, because they believed that this song was going to be a hit song that was going to be worth millions of dollars. And so they wanted all that money and wanted the rights to the song before it hit the mainstream. The paper that Alex signed was a legal release with a fake parchment glued above their signatures. Everyone celebrates by having dinner at the plantation with a crawdad gumbo. And the episode ends with the frog eating every drop in the pot, with Shaggy even suggesting making frog gumbo instead, which scares the frog out. But the frog comes back after Shaggy reassures him that he was only kidding and that the gang prefer pizza anyway. That's something that me and the gang can both agree on. Pizza's my all-time favorite food. I'm going to give Season 1, Episode 9 of the Scooby Doo Show 2 stars out of 5. Yeah, this isn't a great episode. It's a contender for one of the worst episodes of the series so far. Really terrible episode. It has a few positives to it, but it's very bad. It has a lot of negatives to it that are like holding it down to almost a 1. You know, because I was almost on the verge of giving it a 1, but I gave a couple of positives a pass. But even some of the positives weren't amazing either. I don't know if it's the worst of the series so far, but it is certainly a contender for one of the worst of the series so far. I can see why Scooby Doo fans don't really talk about it as much, and even when they do, they don't really praise it that well, because it's not that amazing of an episode. However, before I get into the negatives of the episode and what makes this episode bad, I'll first go into my positives for the episode and explain what I actually liked about the episode. So starting with the positives, my first one is that I think Fred created a cool trap in this episode. Not really much of a leader in this episode. I wouldn't really consider Fred much of a leader or really piecing together the clues to help solve the mystery. But he did create a cool trap. Not one of the most, inventive traps. I think it was just a net and some mirrors. Kind of similar to a Tiki Scares No Fair. So it's not anything new, but I think the novelty of it is that it actually worked and it didn't fail this time, which was a nice little treat and a nice subversion from the usual trope of Fred's traps always failing, but Shaggy and Scooby end up capturing the villains anyways through dumb luck. This time Fred does succeed in trapping the villains, so he looks good. His trap actually looks competent in this episode. So while not one of the most exquisite traps ever, like it's not that inventive, we've seen it before, some of the elements of the trap. It's still a cool enough trap that I did like. It did make, it did create a good subversion for Fred and his trap and put Fred in a more positive light in this episode than he normally would be, because normally his traps would fail. Then, of course, we have Daphne. So, while Daphne didn't really have many moments in this episode, there was one moment that really stuck out that made me enjoy her character that much in this episode. And it was this cool moment where her and Alex went to the basement, as a group when they were searching for clues, which was a nice little team up. And she had this cool moment of bluffing Mamba Wamba by saying that she knows karate and her hands are deadly weapons, which is a nice little nod to future Daphne, a neat foreshadowing for future incarnations for Daphne, because if you're familiar with a later series with Daphne, she ends up being very martial arts heavy and karate heavy, knows a lot of fighting skills, and, becomes a better fighter in some of the later series. But I just kind of love the bit of foreshadowing there. And I think Daphne had a good, was a fun enough personality in this episode. Like, I don't know. It's hard to explain what about her performance that I like, but I think I love that particular moment in general, as the most. It really gave Daphne a big moment to shine and made me, overlook the fact that even though she didn't have much to do in the episode, that one moment really shined a light on her character. And it was cool because it was because it was a different kind of team up. She was with her friend Alex, Super, and she was bluffing by, protecting him by pretending to bluff the villain by saying that her hands are like deadly weapons and that she knows karate or martial arts. When at this stage, she's not shown to know that stuff, but it's neat foreshadowing for future Daphne who does know that stuff. But I just thought it was a really neat moment for Daphne, and I love Heather North's performance in that scene. She did a good job characterizing Daphne in that scene, and yeah, it was just a fun moment that really stood out for Daphne and gave her a lot of personality and character. So that's why I gave Daphne a pass in the episode. So after many episodes of Daphne not really doing much in the episode, she finally has an episode where she at least has like a concrete moment that I could say, yes, I like this moment, and I think Daphne was passable. Not the best, not the best showcase of Daphne. Daphne's been better in certain episodes, but definitely after the many episodes of her having no standout moments and doing really not really doing much for the episode, it's great to finally have an episode where she has this cool standout moment. So yeah, I really enjoyed Daphne in this episode just for that scene alone. And then, of course, we have Shaggy and Scooby. Shaggy and Scooby were the best in this episode, particularly Shaggy. Shaggy was the strongest member of the gang in this episode and did almost everything in this episode. So Shaggy and Scooby were their usual funny, cowardly selves. A lot of great humor. There was a nice little set piece, of Shaggy and Scooby tricking the zombie into trying like a dress that they found in one of the rooms. That was a funny little set piece. There was a lot of, comedic back and forth between the rest of the gang members, which was cool. And they helped trap the villains at the end. And I just love that line by Shaggy. Like I said, that line where he said, "Next time I'm going to come up with the trap and you're going to be the bait." And I so would have loved that. I so would have loved how Shaggy created a trap and said, "Now you're going to be the bait, Fred. You're going to see what it's like in my shoes." And I just would have loved had a future episode Hanna-Barbera followed through with that line and done something cool. Regardless, I still thought it was a cool line. Shaggy and Scooby also helped get the parchment from the villains, which was great. Obviously, the frog was the one who stole it, but they got it from the frog. And Shaggy was the one that came up with the idea and said, "Oh boy, I know I don't normally say this, but if we want to get this mystery done, I think we're going to have to get that parchment." Which was so smart of Shaggy to say that. He's like, well, if we're going to get out of here and finish this mystery up and get Fred and Daphne to just finish it already, we're going to have to brave up a little and go after this parchment paper, even though we don't want to. So I thought that was great, foresight on Shaggy's front, and great thinking on Shaggy's front, because he's the one that got the one and only vital clue of the episode, which was that parchment. And Shaggy had a great dynamic with this frog. In the second half of the episode, I equated the frog to kind of like Jeepers, It's the Creeper, where Scooby had the chick and the chick was following Scooby around and had a little bond with it. This time, I think I noticed that the frog had a bond with Shaggy and stayed with him for a lot of the episode. And it kind of gave me similar vibes to that, the Creeper episode. So they definitely reused the element there. And the frog, though, was much more helpful than the baby chick, because the frog actually got a vital clue and it tagged along with Shaggy and Scooby. The frog had so much personality, and the frog shouldn't have this much personality because he's just a frog, a random frog who just shows up out of nowhere and just decides to tag along with Shaggy and Scooby for the second half of the episode. Such a odd, dynamic, but a fun one nonetheless. And I just love the fact that the frog did a lot to help in the episode by getting the parchment for Shaggy and Scooby. But the frog just also had this fun little dynamic with Shaggy, which was just interesting to me. It just mirrored that, that relationship with Scooby and the baby chick and Jeepers, It's the Creeper. It was just an interesting, parallel to that. So, yeah, Shaggy and Scooby were amazing. They were bait for the trap. They helped capture the villains. They got the parchment from the villains, which was the one and only clue of the episode. And Shaggy was the one to help. And they also saved Alex and his other band members, right? He helped all of them get free when he saw that they were trapped. They even had a little set piece where Shaggy and Scooby pretended to be fellow witch doctors. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, Shaggy and Scooby helped, especially Shaggy helped get the band members untied, get the parchment back. It was all Shaggy's doing. And to me, this was Shaggy's episode. I think out of every member of the gang, Shaggy was the big highlight of this episode. And as someone who loves Shaggy the most out of the gang, and Shaggy's my favorite character, Any episode that can give him a good spotlight and give him a lot to do, that's pretty good for his character. I just wish he was surrounded by better elements throughout the episode, but Shaggy was not the reason this episode failed at all. Shaggy and Scooby were amazing in this episode. Great comedy, their usual cowardly selves, and they contributed a lot to the episode by getting the vital clue, by helping free the band members that were tied up and rescuing their friends, and getting the parchment from Mamba Wamba and his minions, and giving it to Fred, Daphne, and Velma, and also being bait for the trap. So Shaggy and Scooby, pitch perfect in this episode. I thought there were a good number of suspects in the episode. So you had 4 suspects in the episode. You had Alex, Super, you had Ray, you had Dreek, and then you had Roger, the band manager. Now, these were a good amount of suspects because you had Mamba Wamba, who was the main villain. You had Zombie Lila, so you knew Lila was in on it. And you had the Pink Cloak Zombie. So the questions you were wondering was who was Mamba Wamba and who was the Pink Cloak Zombie. Now, Roger didn't hide the fact that he was suspicious in the least bit. He was so suspicious from the get-go, it was obvious from a mile away that he was involved in the scheme. So it wasn't even a question. I knew Roger was one of them. And I actually suspected that he was Mamba Wamba. And lo and behold, he was. He didn't hide that fact. The more important question, really, I was wondering was who was going to be the Pink Cloak Zombie. Now, I didn't think it was Alex Super, because although, like, Hanna-Barbera usually goes for the least suspicious people, there was no sort of suspicion. I felt at least the least suspicious person always has some sort of suspicion. Alex Super being a friend of the gang's and being helpful and not really doing anything that would, alert me to him being suspicious in any way, made me not really, maybe even hesitated me to even consider him a suspect because he really did nothing suspicious. And his band members, Ray and Dreek, while they could have been potential suspects for the first half of the episode, by the time Shaggy and Scooby found them, they were thrown out the window because we saw the Pink Cloak Zombie right next to them, along with Zombie Lila and Mamba Wamba, so we knew it couldn't be them. So, yeah, I was 50-50 on even giving this a positive, because on the one hand, we did get a good number of suspects, in the cast to help, levy some suspicion to each person that could potentially be the villains of the episode. But on the other hand, the way they executed it wasn't that fantastic. I gave it a pass because the number of suspects were good, but some of the execution was definitely not the best. Like, they made it too obvious that Roger was one of the villains, and they made it too obvious that Alex, Ray, and Dreek had nothing to do with it. So, although we had a good number of suspects, they didn't do a good job dividing the suspicion between the 4 suspects. They made it too obvious one way or the other. So, as an audience member, it was kind of clear, like, who was who. Regardless, though, like I said, I gave it a pass because they technically fulfilled the requirement of at least giving me 4 suspects, and we had 2 villains besides Zombie Lila. But, yeah, the execution was iffy, to say the least, so. And my final positive is I think the atmosphere of the episode was pretty good. I think it was filled with tension and suspense because you were fearing for the gang's safety. And you were on the edge of your seat. The problem, and the atmosphere kind of has the same issue with the suspect department as well. There is atmosphere in this episode, but it's only in the first half. When we get to the second half, and when we find out what happens to the band members, when Shaggy and Scooby discover the band members tied up, we lose all the atmosphere we had in the first half. What I mean by that is that in the first half of the episode, the band members are getting picked off one by one. Like, there's voodoo dolls that get dropped off. They're getting picked off one by one. And you're fearing for the gang's safety because, like, they're wondering which one of them is going to be next, who's going to be taken, and what's going to happen to them, what happened to their friends. Like, like great questions and a lot of intrigue. Like you're just like, oh my god, like what happened to these band members? Like they keep disappearing one by one, and could the gang be next? Like, you know, are they all gonna disappear? Where are they gonna go? Like, yeah, there's just like there's all that tension and suspense in the first half, but then once you get those answers by the second half, a lot of the second half, it just kind of dies down and the atmosphere isn't really there anymore. But I gave it a pass for the atmosphere. I gave a pass for because it was there and it was great in the first half. But I think in the second half, when they revealed it, they kind of lost it and it dwindled down to the point where there was no tension or suspense in the atmosphere anymore. So while there was atmosphere and it was there, it wasn't consistently throughout the episode. It was only there for the first half, and then it died down in the second half of the episode. But that's all I got for positives, so let's get on to the mini list of negatives of the episode and what issues I have with it. So starting with the negatives, my first one is I think Velma was pretty weak in this episode. I wasn't really happy with how Velma was utilized in this episode. She wasn't really any sort of lead. She wasn't really a leader in this episode. She didn't piece together the clues to help solve the mystery. Although she gave the explanation at the end, I never felt the sense that Velma was piecing together what was going on. I never sensed that the wheels were, you know, turning in her brain. And she was like, "Oh, you know, this is a vital clue. Like I'm getting one step closer to finding out the truth." Like I'm not seeing that from Velma in this episode. I'm not seeing the gears turning in her head and piecing the puzzles together. So Velma didn't really fulfill her usual role, and she didn't really do much in this episode, which is a shame. She didn't have a standout moment like Fred or Daphne, which is why I gave those two a pass. Velma was quite weak in this episode, in my opinion. Then we have the villains of the episode, who I thought were just awful. They were terrible villains. So you got Mamba Wamba, who's an ancient shaman. You have Zombie Lila, and you have the pink-cloaked zombie. All of them, every single one of them, feel lazy and repetitive. They were not scary or entertaining. Terrible villains. So with Mamba Wamba, while his design is different and somewhat unique, I'll give it that, he feels so similar to Geronimo and Decoy for a Dog Napper, like, where he, like, does a lot of talking. Like, he doesn't really put on much of a facade, at least not to me. Like, he feels repetitive. I feel like we've had witch doctors before, and I feel like the witch doctor, the witch doctor, you know, the Hawaiian one, you know, that Mr. Sims played in Tiki Scares No Fair is probably the best one. And while I didn't like Geronimo, I feel like he's kind of like Mamba Wamba feels very similar to Geronimo in some respects, to where he just feels like pretty lazy and like just a repeat of him, because he just kind of like he just doesn't really have much of a presence. He's not really scary or entertaining. He doesn't do what Geronimo does and like talks in his normal voice. Like Roger doesn't talk in his normal voice. But it's just something about the way Mamba Wamba speaks. Like there's not really any sort of intimidation or threat. It's just like he just kind of feels like you just can tell that he's not like any sort of ghost or monster or anything. It just kind of feels like it's a little bit obvious that he's someone in a costume. Zombie Lila definitely has the best design, but again, it's just her in zombie makeup. And while it's definitely the best design, I think my issue with this is that we just had a zombie in the previous episode, and it kind of feels like, why are we doing another zombie in back-to-back episodes? I just feel like, couldn't we be a little bit more creative? Like, we had a zombie in the last episode. Why not try to go in a different direction? Like, I'm not saying don't use a zombie as a villain in the episode, but just maybe wait a few episodes before you do a zombie as a villain. I just kind of feel like it was too early. Like we've seen a zombie before, And while we haven't seen a zombie like Lila's definitely feels more like a bit more like a modern zombie, although definitely not as gory as a modern zombie, but a little bit similar to the zombies of that time and not like the old school ones. So while she looks cool, it's just kind of, my issue really is that it just kind of feels like we've already done a zombie in the previous episode. Why are we doing another one again? Like, do we really need 2 zombies as the villains back to back? And not just that, it's not just her as a zombie. We have a fucking pink cloaked zombie who is literally a reskin of the zombie from Which Witch is Which. It's literally the same design, just the groaning is different. It sounds off, to be quite honest. And we have another pink cloak. I don't understand what it was with Hanna-Barbera saying, let's do the same villain that we did before, but let's make a pink cloak on them. We had a pink cloak as a zombie in the last one. We have a pink cloak on a zombie this one. What is this obsession with putting pink cloaks on zombies? I don't understand why they do this. It's such an odd design choice. And while it was worked with the No-Face Zombie, because he was really cool and actually had a lot of great moments and had great scary moments and was entertaining despite some of his design choices, because this is a reskin of a zombie from Which Witch is Which and doesn't sound like that zombie, isn't as cool as that zombie, and the color scheme does not match the zombie at all, and it makes him non-threatening. Like, he's not scary in the slightest. Like, he looks even worse than he did in the Scooby Doo Where Are You episode Which Witch is Which. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is just a lazy and repetitive design. Like, we've seen the zombie before done better. Like, the zombie Which Witch is Which is so much better than this zombie. This zombie just feels like a downgrade from that zombie, despite reusing the same design. It has, the voice doesn't match, like the growls, like it doesn't work for me, and the pink cloak is such an odd choice. I really don't get why Hanna-Barbera is so obsessed with giving zombies pink cloaks. It's not a color scheme that works for a monster, I feel like. Maybe certain monsters here or there, but so far the pink design for anything doesn't really scream scary to me. Pink's just not a color that normally can work like that as a scary one. If it's red, yeah, red can work, but pink just feels, it's too vibrant. It's like too colorful. It's not really something you consider scary or downbeat or grim. So it's just an odd choice for a zombie. I much prefer the original design for the zombie where it was green. And yeah, it's just lazy and repetitive because it's literally just a reskin of the zombie from Which Witch is Which, but just a worse version of that one. So all of them are bad, mainly to the fact that they all feel either they feel lazy and repetitive, and they aren't scary or entertaining in the slightest. It just feels like the villain department where it's just reusing previous villains or reusing assets of previous villains and just incorporating them into these villains. And there really wasn't much uniqueness or flavor to these villains to make them stand out much. And having back-to-back episodes of zombies, but not only that, but they have 2 zombies in this episode when we just had 1 the previous, making it 3 zombies we've had in 2 episodes. Yeah, I think it's time we give the zombies a break and come back to them maybe a little bit later. And let's try to come up with a different villain now. Thank you. Outside of costume, I think Roger, Lila, and the unnamed henchman, all boring, all uninteresting, no flavor to them. Roger gets the most screen time out of them, but because of how obviously he's playing it up and being fake, we don't really get to know him much as a person, as a band manager. I don't really get much from him, so he's just very boring. Lila gets kidnapped like pretty early on, or fakes her kidnapping early on, so we don't get to know much about her or her relationship with the gang, or how close she was with the gang, was she a mutual friend because of Alex? Did she even meet the gang before that point? Like, you know, it's just like we don't really get to know what she's really like as a person, because she just doesn't really get that much screen time. And need I say more about the unnamed henchman? We don't know who this guy is. We don't know his background. We don't know if he's a hired henchman. We don't know if he's a friend of Lila's or Roger's. We don't know who the fuck this guy is. I don't understand who this guy, why this guy was brought on. Like, who is this guy? Why was he brought on? Like, I like, so we get no backstory for him. We get nothing about him. We don't see him before that point. So I shouldn't have to explain more on that front. He's an unnamed henchman who gets no screen time whatsoever until the end, where he unmasked himself. I found the motive of the episode to be really dumb, to be quite honest. I did not like it at all. It was terrible. So the motive of the villains, specifically Roger and Lila and this unnamed henchman, was that they wanted to scare the band into signing the rights of the Mamba Wamba song away to them, because they believed it would be a hit song that would make millions upon millions of dollars. Where do I even begin with how dumb this motive is? I mean, first off, what indication about that song does Roger and Lila get that this is going to be some sort of hit? Hit songs are random and don't just, aren't something that you can easily predict. So I don't understand what Roger and Lila saw in that song to make them believe, oh, this is going to hit the charts. This is going to be a top 10 hit song. It's going to be on all radios. It's going to make a bunch of money. People are going to pay for this. Like, because from what I saw, it's not really that amazing of a song, and nothing about it screams this is going to be a hit song. Now, granted, you don't know what will be a hit song, so it could have been a hit song, but they have no way of knowing that this is going to be a hit song. And they don't know how much money they're even going to get from the song. They could get very little money, if that. It could be a flop. It could be a good song that they get a lot of money for. They could just get a decent amount of money. The uncertainty of this makes me question why they would go through with this, because I just don't understand what they saw in this song that made them think, yeah, let's get the rights to the song, because we just automatically assume that we're going to make millions upon millions of dollars on it. How could you assume that? You can't predict hit songs. Hit songs are spontaneous. That's the whole point of it. You don't know when something's going to be a hit until it's released to the public. Some things that you don't think are going to be a hit end up being a hit, and some things that you think are going to be amazing end up being flops. So they had no way of knowing, no certainty whatsoever of knowing that this was going to be a hit song. So that was dumb on their part. They didn't know how much money the song was going to make either. And even if they had succeeded, the band could have easily taken legal action after they found out what Roger and Lila did, because they literally threatened and coerced them into signing the rights away. You don't just get away with that. Like, you literally threaten them with, and coerce them. You tied them up, you threatened them to sign, or you were going to do something to them, and force them to sign the rights away. And eventually the band members were going to find out, Alex and Ray and Drake were going to find out what Roger and Lila did, and they most likely would have probably pursued legal action, and they probably would have lost Roger and Lila. And what do you know, their plan would have been a bust anyway, because they literally got the rights through illegal means and not through, actual legal means. Like, you can't just threaten and coerce someone to sign the rights away. That's not how that works. Like, that's not going to hold up in a court of law. Like, you're going to lose those rights. Like, they still have ownership of it. So, like, even if they had succeeded with this, Alex would have found out eventually that about their scheme, and he would have threatened them with legal action and have probably gotten the song back, and that would make this whole motive completely pointless. So it's pointless on all fronts. There's no reason to do this at all. Like, I don't know what they were planning to achieve. There was so much uncertainty about the money of the song, whether the song was going to be hit at all. Like, so much uncertainty, and the fact that they could face legal action after what they did. Like, this is just a dumb motive. Like, I don't understand why Roger and Lila thought this was a good motive, but it would have never worked in a million years. They would have been caught. They would have been tried in a court. Like, you know, they would have been probably sued by Alex, and they would have lost even if they had gotten the rights to it, because they got it through illegal means and not through actual legal means. Yes, I know it's a legal document, but they threatened and coerced them without free will. Like, Alex wasn't like, yeah, I'm just going to freely, you know, sign over the song. No, they forced him through a threat of violence to sign the rights away. Like, that's not going to hold up at all. So, like, and like I said, like, there's no guarantee the song's going to be a hit. You don't know how much money the song's going to make. Like, and nothing about this song screams hit material. So, dumb motive across the board. Roger and Lila are probably the stupidest villains I've ever come across. Definitely on Carl the Stuntman levels of dumbassery, because this motive would have never worked in a million years. Never. It was terrible across the board. There was no mystery in this episode at all. Like, none whatsoever. There wasn't really much of, like, you could argue that, you know, the mystery could have been like, oh, what happened to Lila, Roger, and Alex, and the rest of and Ray and Dreek when they all were disappearing. But it's pretty clear what happened by the halfway point through the episode. Once Shaggy and Scooby go to, you know, on top of the hut on Mamba Wamba's hideout and figure out what's going on. So, and there's even hints of it before that. So it's like, it's so obvious you could see it a mile away. So, and the answers we get at the end about, you know, why is Mamba Wamba after the band and all that. Once we get the answer to that, we're just like, it's just an unsatisfactory answer, an unsatisfactory conclusion that there's not really, I'm not really invested in it, in that mystery either. So, like, there really is no mystery in this episode, because the answers are either unsatisfying and terrible, or they get answered very quickly throughout halfway through the episode, or even earlier than that. So, no mystery whatsoever. So, there was only one clue in the episode, and that was the fake parchment over the legal document. But we don't know what's on the parchment until the very end. And once we find out, like, it's unsatisfactory. So, the clue, and with there only being one clue and not really any other sort of clues, like, you know, Mamba Wamba's shaker doesn't count, his maracas don't count as, like, a clue, or anything, or the voodoo dolls or anything. These are more so scare tactics than they are, like, clues. So it's just like, yeah, there's only that one clue, which is the document, legal document under the fake parchment paper. But we don't find out what's on it until the very end, and once we find that out, it's so unsatisfactory that it's not the same case as the previous episode, where the one clue was utilized and executed very well and helped the episode in a significant way. This one didn't really do that and was very bland and boring and not a very satisfactory clue. And there wasn't any other clues throughout the episode. So yeah, it was terrible on the clue front. And my final negative is I found the setting of the episode to be dull and repetitive. So the setting of the episode was Lila's Southern Mansion, called Mason Dupree. Lila's Southern Mansion wasn't unique or interesting in the slightest. It was very dull and very repetitive. Nothing interesting about the setting. We've had the setting before in the first Harlem Globetrotters episode. We've had swampy areas before in the Scooby Doo Show, like in the first Scooby Dum episode, which was the Gator Ghoul episode. So this just feels like we've had this stuff before, and there's nothing really unique or new in the setting to add some sort of flavor to make it stand out much. So it's a very dull and boring main setting for the episode. Not Scooby-esque really at all. Just very boring. Overall, guys, I would not recommend this episode to fans and newcomers to the show. It's a very bad episode. It's very lazy and repetitive to me. It just feels like, besides Shaggy, who was really the big standout of the episode, Shaggy and Scooby, this episode was very close to being one of the probably the worst episode of the series. A couple of elements saved it. Mainly Shaggy and Scooby were the highlight of this episode and were the main reason that I liked it, at least some of it. But it was still terrible. It's a contender for probably the worst in the series for a reason. Definitely on the level of the Fiesta Hostess and Aztec Ghost. It might even be worse than that episode. I can see why this episode isn't talked about fondly. It's just not a great episode. It feels redundant. It feels lazy. It feels like we're just reusing stuff that's been done before, but we're not utilizing them, but we're not creating anything new in the process, nothing unique or interesting. Like I said, you can repeat any element you want as long as you give it some flavor, some uniqueness, some freshness to make it stand out in some way. And they just didn't do that in this episode, so yeah, would not recommend it at all. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please give a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the episode. Do you like this episode? Do you think I'm being harsh on this episode? Are there more positives to it that you see that I don't see? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you hate this episode? Like, do you agree with me? Like, is this not a good episode? I'd be interested in that as well. Like, do you think this episode is terrible like I do? And a contender for one of the worst episodes of the series? Or are you somewhere in the middle where you just think it's average and decent and okay, but it's not good or bad? I'm curious for your thoughts, so let me know. And subscribe for more Scooby-Doo content like this, or if you're just interested in any of my other content, obviously I'll have more Scooby-Doo content on the way, both review-wise with the Scooby Doo Show, gaming video-wise with Mystery Mayhem, and plenty more to come. I have a video of why I think the new Scooby-Doo movies is underrated. That's a big project that I'm, working on and will get out probably in due time. I'm very excited for when that project comes out. It'll be fun to explain why I think that show is underrated. But yeah, I'm a diehard Scooby-Doo fan. I love talking all things Scooby-Doo. So if you're like me and you're a diehard Scooby-Doo fan and wants to see like all pieces of Scooby-Doo media tackled and, not just the popular stuff, but actual like everything, and give each piece of Scooby-Doo media the spotlight and talk about why it's good or bad or decent, then come join the channel and experience some amazing Scooby-Doo content. Come discuss Scooby-Doo episodes, Scooby-Doo movies, Scooby-Doo video games, and Scooby-Doo books with me. Anything. In my next video, I will continue my reviews of the Scooby Doo Show with a review of Season 1, Episode 10 of the Scooby Doo Show, titled A Frightened Hound Meets Demons Underground. An episode that I'm actually pretty excited to actually tackle again. I remember some good things about it. Not highly regarded, but definitely an episode that gets a little bit of talk, and whenever it's talked about, it's usually good. So while my expectations aren't high, they're definitely higher than they are with this episode. And hopefully it'll be a step up from this episode and we can get back on track to a good episode again. But if you want to know my thoughts on A Frightened Hound Meets Demons Underground, then come join me next time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, peace out.
We got it all together for a brand new show. Scooby Doo is here again, away we go.